Message. So just a little recap of last week. We talked about how you can outline the book. It's really difficult because prophets, like Luther's statement was, they get a little bit weird. They're hard to follow around. They jump from this thing to that thing to that thing to that thing. Peritaxis was our big word, our literary word. They move around. They don't really follow a chronology. Micah follows that to a T. But we did take a little stab at trying to put some order to his 7 chapters. So chapters 1 through 3 generally are that fierce judgment. Those are the oracles of doom, right? The judgment against, and he starts with Samaria and Judah, which is interesting because that's the church, right? He's not just preaching against the other nations. He's speaking directly to God's people, the northern tribes and the southern tribe of Judah. And then it climaxes, like we heard today in the message, with that final prediction of the destruction of Jerusalem because of the leaders posing and posturing phony faith that abused people. God said, finally, if you don't listen to me and come back, you will be obliterated. And the northern tribes were by the Assyrians, 721. Judah, it takes 150 years, but it happens too. Eventually, the Babylonians come. But then it changes in chapters 4 to 5 to grace. That was what we heard today. That God says, here's my judgment. Jerusalem will be like rubble. But then the very next verse, in the latter days, God's going to restore Jerusalem. Right? He's going to rebuild Zion. And the nations are going to come to it. So there's this rhythm of final judgment, but there's also grace. Right? Grace. But then chapter 5, we'll focus in a little bit more next week. And that'll be our Christmas Eve text. But as for you, Bethlehem of Ephrathah, though you are the least of these among the clans of Judah, out of you will come a ruler, right? A ruler. From ancient days, from the old days, and he's going to shepherd his people. So we've got that image of grace. Not only a restored Jerusalem, but a ruler to rule in the midst of it, and finally fulfilled by Jesus. But then chapter 6 begins again with judgment, right? This idea of judgment. The prophecies of judgment. And we're going to look at that text from Micah 6 a little bit more intensely today. And then it ends again with this image of final grace. The last 3 verses of the prophet, but who is a God like you? And well, the answer is really nobody, because he's a God who forgives, passes over our transgressions, throws them into the seas, and will remain faithful to his people forever. So if you're looking at your little chart like this is that Bible Project summary of the book. That's kind of what they've mapped out here. Starting at the far left-hand corner, chapters 1 and 2, right? God appears and brings his judgment. But at the end of chapter 2, that little frame at the very bottom of that column, he does offer a couple verses of hope about how God's going to lead a shepherd. But then, chapters 3, again, judgment. But at the very bottom of that frame, that second frame, chapters, Jerusalem, a new Jerusalem is going to be coming, right? A new permanent place forever. And then that forever place, God's people are going to come to it. And then chapters 5, it talks about how there's this ruler who's going to rule over God's people forever, fulfilled by Jesus. Then we get back up the last frame, chapters 6 and 7. There's that judgment again. We're going to take a look at that chapter. I'm going to do so with some pictures. Oh, I should have had this up if I could point it to you. That would have been easier, right? Yeah. So here we are. This is where we're going to be right now. We're going to go focus on this part. Israel's unjust economic practices come under God's scrutiny. So just to give you the historical context again of what's happening is when the Assyrians begin to make their sweeping invasion of the northern tribes in the areas, that leaves people leaving, because who wants to face an impending army coming upon your village? So you pack up little belongings that you have and you leave, and those become known as what? When people flee from impending doom. Refugees. Yeah, they're refugees. And so archaeology actually has discovered this at around that time period, the 700s, the mid-700s, when Assyria was making this big, massive land invasion, that the population around Jerusalem quadrupled, right? because of all these fleeing refugees. And when you have more people but the same amount of resources, what happens to that? It's ripe for what? Crime.
Yeah.
No, basically mafia
Ripping
crime.
them off.
Ripping them off. Yep.
Having food available, but charging a lot of money.
Exactly. And this is what's happening. And God sees it all. And Micah, the prophet, sees it all, right? From his little village, he sees what's happening in the big city with the leaders and how the little people are getting squashed, and the people who should be leading and caring are abusing and taking advantage of it. And God sees it, and prophet Micah sees it and speaks on God's behalf against it. That's what this chapter 6 is going to be about. So that's what we're going to look at. So before we do look at it, though, I'm going to do a little bit of a review with you guys again, some of the images that we looked at. So we've got our prophet here, right? Looking kind of stern and angry. And what's the finger? When somebody's pointing a finger at you, what does that usually mean?
No.
Listen to me.
Listen to me, exactly. And you're being accused. He's accusatory, and his thing is listen to me, which is exactly what prophets did. Do they tell the future? Are they foretellers? A little bit. Micah will specifically talk about Bethlehem and the future birthplace of Jesus. He sees it, and it will happen, but they're more foretellers. Because here's what foretellers do. They speak on God's behalf. This is what we see happening. And they attack it on this thing called the Sinai Covenant. We talked about that. So before we look at Micah 6, open your Bibles to Exodus chapter 20. We're going to do a quick little review about what this covenant is. Because the Sinai Covenant is not just the Ten Commandments. Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20. So sometimes we mistake that the covenant is just the Ten Commandments. No, that's just an element of it, right? The covenant is much bigger than that. God makes a covenant with Israel. When they come out of Egypt, God leads them to this mountain. When he says, I bring you out of Egypt, you're going to worship me on the mountain. And so they go to this mountain, and the mountain's name was Sinai. It's at the very southern tip of the Sinai Peninsula. And there God comes down onto the mountain, and Moses joins him, and God follows the pattern of what happened in their historical cultural worldview. There was a thing called the Suzerainid Hittite treaty format.
Oh my goodness.
Right?
That's
And so they discovered this, that when nations are ruled by kings and one nation overcomes another nation, they would make a treaty for this. They would make a treaty on how to continue their relationship. One powerful king over a conquered kingdom. Okay? And God, if you will, is mirroring that same kind of treaty that was happening in the culture and the world with his people. So the very first one, so Exodus chapter 20. Somebody want to read big voice, verses 1 and 2 of Exodus chapter 20.
And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery.
Right? So those two verses are the first two parts of what a covenant is. The first thing is a preamble, where the more powerful king says who you are. I am the Lord your God. God declares who he is. I am Yahweh your God. There's the preamble. And then the next one is called the historical prologue. This is what has happened. If this was a treaty in the kingdoms of the world, it would have been, I, King Sennacherib, of the fifth of my name, have overcome you, your kingdom of Israel, and King Judah. I have overcome you and defeated you. Well, here's what God says the historical prologue is. I brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. So God's declared what he has done for his people. Then read verse 3, if somebody would, please. Big voice.
You shall have no other gods before me.
And what do we call that? The first commandment, right? You shall have no other gods before me. And then you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. Do not murder. Do not steal. Do not commit adultery. Do not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's stuff. Right? All together we call it the Ten Commandments. How many other really in the books of Moses, so? 603 more.
Yeah.
Who's good at math? 613. Yeah, really good. Me too. All right. I was told there'd be no math. That's, there's a line, I think that's from the movie Fletch. Chevy Chase fans. So, stipulations. That's the third part of a covenant. The preamble. I am the Lord your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Here's what I've done. Now here are the stipulations. Here's how our relationship should go. And the Ten Commandments are the stipulations. These are God's teachings. They're not bad. They're good. Right? They're good. Now, number 4 is what we call the preservation and the rereading. The people would recovenant themselves to it. So it happens in the book of Deuteronomy. Moses speaks all these words again to the people. It's in Deuteronomy 6, 5 or 6, one of those 2 chapters. We don't need to go look at it, but they preserve it and they reread it, committing themselves to it. It happens again at the end of the book of Joshua. In Joshua 24, after the people finally come into the land, Joshua reads the entire book of the covenant, and then he says, choose for yourselves this day whom you will follow. But as for me and my household, we will serve the Lord. Yeah. So Joshua's saying, me and my family, we're going to commit to this. We're going to preserve ourselves in this. And they reread it. And they keep coming back to it. And then number 5, you have the witnesses. Okay? In the ancient text, and it was I remember it was in Deuteronomy 30, but I don't remember the exact verse. There was another one in Deuteronomy where God says, I have set before you my witnesses, heaven and earth. Creation itself are my witnesses. And I believe it's in Deuteronomy 30 where it says, choose for you this day, choose life or death. God says, here are the witnesses. Creation itself are my witnesses. And then finally, the blessings and the curses. So let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 28 real quick. Deuteronomy chapter 28. Excuse me. Bless you. Thank you. Deuteronomy chapter 28, and it's at the very first verse. You probably have, it says, blessings for obedience. Or what does the ESV, how does the ESV subtitle this, Jim? Blessings for obedience. Yeah. So here is the blessings. God's saying, if you follow and you keep this covenant, it goes well for you. You get to stay in the land. I'll continue to be your God always, but you get to stay in the land like I brought you here, right? But the blessings go through verse 14. Look down at verse 15. And what does it say?
Curses.
Curses for disobedience. So here God...
And it starts with however.
Yeah, however. And then the curses go on for a couple chapters, right? Chapters 28 and 29. Look at specifically verse 36. Chapter 28, verse 36. Here's part of the curses. If you they're not critical if you sin, right? God's not saying he's going to break all this covenant if you sin. You break the covenant when you choose to follow other gods. When you become idolatrous, right? And you put your trust in other gods. Verse 36. God says, here's the curse. The Lord will drive you and the king you set over you to a nation unknown to you and your fathers. There you will worship other gods, gods of wood and stone. There you'll become a thing of horror, an object of scorn, ridicule to all the nations where the Lord will drive you. Very specific, isn't it? Other nations are going to take you over. And those are the curses that God warned them of. This is what the prophets will keep reminding the people of. They come back to this, they bring their judgment based on this covenant and how the people, not that they were sinners, they were idolatrous and they put their trust in other gods. That's what they come to do. And that's what Micah 6 is going to be about. So let's take a look at Micah chapter 6. And again, he's only 7 chapters. He tucked somewhere in there between Hosea and Malachi. There he is. Micah chapter 6. All right, everybody got it? All right, I'm going to read it out loud. You all can follow along. Listen to what the Lord says. Stand up. Plead your case before the mountains. Let the hills hear what you have to say. Hear, O mountains, the Lord's accusation. Listen, you everlasting foundations of the earth, for the Lord has a case against his people. He is lodging a charge against Israel. My people, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Answer me. I brought you out of Egypt, redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, also Aaron and Miriam. My people, remember what Balak king of Moab counseled and what Balaam son of Beor answered. Remember your journey from Shittim to Gilgal, that you might know the righteous acts of the Lord. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with 1,000 rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I bear my firstborn and offer my firstborn for my transgression? Shall I offer the fruit of my soul for the sin of my fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has shown you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. All right. So, I contend that this is a covenant lawsuit. What's a lawsuit? Where do these usually happen? Lawsuits.
Court.
In a courtroom scene. So what language in the first couple verses do you see that give us evidence that this is a courtroom scene that God is intending to offer here?
Plead your case.
Which verse is that, John?
6:1.
6:1. Plead your case. Yeah. Anything else that gives an image of this being a courtroom scene?
Verse 2.
What do you got there?
Says, hear you mountains, the indictment of the Lord.
Indictment's a courtroom word, isn't it? Yeah. We have accusation in the NIV, but same thing, right? An accusation, indictment. He's lodging a charge. The end of that verse. This is all courtroom language. So in this courtroom, who's the defendant? Who's put on trial?
People.
The people. The people of Israel. The people of Judah. They're the ones being put on trial. God's got a case against them. Who's the judge? God. Who is the prosecutor? God. Who's the witnesses? Nope. The witnesses. Ah, yes, right? You see it?
Before the mountains and let the
Hear, O mountains, the Lord's accusation. Lord's got a case against his people. Hear, O mountains, the everlasting foundations of the earth. Listen to this case that God has. Yeah, he's bringing it up.
creation is the witness.
So let's take a look at from this diagram. Let's break it down a little bit. So this is my symbol that this teaching method uses for God, right? The circle. Circle, one God, has no beginning or no end, just like a circle has no beginning or no end. And the arrows that go out from the circle are always representative of God's love, right? That's how God self-defines himself. Yahweh, Yahweh, you're gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. So love always goes out. But now what's in the middle of that? The judges, what do they call that?
Gavel.
The gavel, right? The judge's gavel. So God is coming in this picture, who is loving and good, but he's coming as he's coming with his judgment. This is a courtroom scene. And everything's going to be based on this. Now this is a little diagram of the Exodus. Okay? So this is our symbol for who?
God.
This is God, right? And notice the arrow is doing what? Coming
Arrows.
down.
Yeah.
Coming down. So this is chains. What might change symbolize over the land of Egypt? Slavery. Yeah. So God hears his people. In the beginning of Exodus, it says God sees their misery, he hears their cries, and he decides to come down. And he's going to address their slavery. And we know how he battled with the 10 plagues and everything like that. And that leaves the people are driven. They leave, they depart, they exodus out of Egypt. But they come to the edge of the Red Sea. And when they get to the edge of the Red Sea, what has Pharaoh done? Changed his mind and chased them. And now they're dead meat, right? Professional army. And they're nothing but refugees. And they're freaking out. God says, do not be afraid. Just got to be still. Watch. Today I'll fight for you. And God does, what is this little things here? Parting of the Red Sea, right? He separates the waters. And they pass through the waters safely. And when Pharaoh tries to pursue, what happens to him?
Waters come back.
The waters come back and wipe them out. Death is destroyed. By the way, this is our whole entire picture of our entire Christian life. This is the same. Our life of a Christian. This mirrors it. Okay? And then God leads them down to this mountain. This is Mount Sinai, the very tip of this Sinai Peninsula. And there on the top of the mountain, God comes down again, and he makes this, what is this a symbol for? The 6 points there? The covenant, makes the covenant with them. I will be your God, and you will be my people. And so God says, center your life around me. So they got a circle of a community, and this is a little diagram of the tabernacle. Whose glory filled the tabernacle at the end of the book of Exodus? God's glory. The Lord's glory. His presence fills the tabernacle. And God says, I'm going to camp in your midst. He literally lives in a tent. And when the cloud leaves, the tents all pack up and they follow where the cloud goes. And then that's where they camp. And how long does that go on in this wilderness area?
40 years.
For 40 years, right? So finally, after 40 years, they recovenant with God and they come to the edge of the east bank and they pass through the waters one more time into the promised land. This is the entire story of the Exodus, okay? And God says, as part of this covenant, I will be your God, you will be my people, and then this is how you live with one another. And the prophets have noticed, what are the people doing? Falling away.
Farther and farther away.
Falling away, farther and farther away. So we've got a group of people here who are the little ones in the land. Driven from their villages, driven from their homelands, because the people who should be caring for them, the leaders, are doing what? They're ripping them off. They're ripping them off. They're taking the scarcity, they're taking the crisis moment and getting filthy rich by it.
Mm-hmm. Money, money, money.
And God sees it through the eyes of his prophet and condemns it over and over and over. So they're sent packing, and now they're homeless. Right? And God says, this is not the way it should be. This is not the way it should be. And then finally, well, we'll get to that one in a bit. But let's go back to our text. So the first two verses, chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. This is all the image of the courtroom scene. Stand up, plead your case before who? There's the witnesses. People, you're the defendant. Plead your case. Let the hills hear what you have to say. Hear, O mountains. The Lord's going to bring his accusation. He's the prosecutor. He's the judge. Listen, you everlasting foundations of the earth. God's got a case against his people. He's got charges that he's leveling against his people. And then verse 3, verses 3 through 5. What kind of language does that sound like? Who's speaking? God is speaking. Now he's speaking almost as the prosecutor, right? My people, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? How have I made it hard for you? And then verse 4, what does he do? What is he reminding them about verse 4? Yeah, I'm reminding you about this.
Yeah.
I'm reminding you about the covenant, about the Exodus. I saved you out of slavery, right? I redeemed you from the land of slavery, right? With an outstretched arm, with a mighty hand. I've redeemed you. I paid the price for you. I led you. I gave you Moses, Aaron. Verse 5, my people remember Balak. Oh, big prize for anybody who can remember what Balak, king of Moab, counseled, and how Balaam, son of Beor, answered. I think I remember this one. I think this is the one where Balak wants to curse the people, and so he sends Balak, who's his sorcerer, to curse them. But whenever he begins to speak, instead of cursing, he's doing what? He's blessing them, right? So the king hires a sorcerer to curse God's people, but whenever he begins to speak, he's actually speaking blessings, because God is intervening for his people. Right? So finally, this is the story where the talking donkey happens. The donkey actually starts to talk because God empowers it to do so. That was even before Mr. Ed. Remember that, right? Mr. Ed. All right, so remember your journey from Shittim to Gilgal, right? So here, this whole journey, and Gilgal is up here right before they end of the road, for 40 years. And for those 40 years, what are they of want? What are they in need of for those 40 years? Nothing. They've got the food God brings from heaven. daily. They've got the water that comes from the rocks that God provides. Their shoes and sandals never wear out. You got to remind them, I cared for you. I nurtured you this 40 years. I made you my sons and my daughters. You learned to trust in me. And then I brought you to Gilgal, to the promised land itself. And then the people react. Somebody want to read verse 6 and 7 again? Big voice, 6 and 7.
With what shall I come before the Lord and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul?
So who's speaking now?
The people.
The people. They're pleading their case. Well, what should we do, God? Right? What should we come before you and bow down? How should we bow down before you, God? And then they list off the things of the offerings, right? Shall I come before burnt offerings with calves a year old? And then they go to the extreme, right? How many rams?
Thousands.
How much oil should they bring before the Lord? 10,000, which is it's the biggest Hebrew number there is. 10,000 in numbering system. That's the biggest number you can count to in their numbering system. After that, you just keep multiplying upon it. And so they're kind of like, how would you characterize their defense?
Well, it's not really a defense. It's not a defending what they did.
No.
It's how about if I do this? Will it make it better if I do this?
Okay, so it's a plea agreement. Let's bargain a plea here.
What can I do to make it better?
Okay. They're also reminding God, we've done all these things. These are the things you are those things. Are they supposed to bring burnt offerings?
Yes.
Yeah. Are they supposed to offer oils and lambs and calves? Yeah.
It's always done then.
They're supposed to do those things. Yeah. But what's their final plea? Their final offer?
Your body.
Not their bodies.
Firstborn.
The firstborn. Child sacrifice. And was child sacrifice practiced?
Yes.
Yes. In the kingdoms and the gods around them, the god of Moloch, who was the god of one of the people groups, required child sacrifice, where their children were thrown into the flames for the sake of whatever. By the way, there was a book written not long ago that got made into a movie called Nefarious, which is basically, Nefarious is a demon that's possessed this man. And the demon is interchanging with this priest. And Nefarious says, compares what our culture does with abortion to child sacrifice. Yeah. It's no different. It's what it is. It's kind of what it could be. Very much pictured as. And the cultures around them thought it was acceptable. And God says to test it. He never asked for it. It's the most detestable thing to God there is.
Anyone, it's hard to imagine how anyone could reason in their mind that a loving God, or a God, period, would require that.
Well, their
How
gods
they
weren't-
would reason that.
and their gods weren't loving. But yeah. But this is what they're going, should we do what our neighbors have been doing?
Mm-hmm.
Will that please you, God? Is that what you're looking for? Should we accommodate to the culture? Yeah. And so they've got their defenses. And so this image here is, well, this is what we do, God. Our priests, they bring their sacrifices. We bring them, and this is all what you wanted, right, God? We should be square. Everything should be right. And God responds with this, right? I have shown you, O man, verse 8. I have shown you, O man. But what does the Lord require? And the word actually there, what does the ESV have? Does it have required? What does the Lord require?
Yeah, the Lord
Okay. It actually more literally means to seek, right? So what does the Lord seek of you? What is he looking for? Not require so much as in check it off the list, but what is he looking for? Yeah, what is God looking for? What is he seeking in you? But three things. To do justice, to act justice, right? To do the right thing. How would you describe the right thing? How would you describe what doing the right thing is?
To love God.
To love God and
Your neighbor.
to love your neighbor as yourself. And to love kindness, or to love mercy. What's God's chief characteristic about himself? Well, he is a loving, merciful God. Yeah. This is the one Hebrew word that's almost untranslatable. The Hebrew word is chesed. And it gets translated as steadfast love, or loyal love, or sometimes kindness, or mercy. It's really hard to define.
Undeserved.
It's undeserved. It takes all of that and combines it into this one powerful word. And it's how God's chief way of defining himself. When Moses asked, God, I want to see you. God says, I'll put you in the rock and I'm going to pass by you. You can see my backside. And when God passes by him, he says those words, Yahweh, Yahweh, you are a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in chesed, in love and mercy. So what does God seek of us but to love mercy? To trust that he is a merciful God. What God is asking of us. And then finally, to walk humbly with your God. It doesn't have your in there. It should. Humbly with your God. And I know, mine does too. It just doesn't on that screen. Yeah.
Okay.
It should have, yeah. So to walk humbly. What does it mean to walk, by the way? What is that a parallel statement for? To be
To live.
and to live. Yeah, to be and to live. To be is a state of being. To live is the active process of it. Yeah. A lot of the times in the New Testament, whenever you see Paul live a life worthy of the calling that you have, like Ephesians, live the life worthy, the word literally is walk. Sometimes people think that just means this, right? It does literally mean to walk, but to live humbly with your God, which is a being, a state of being. I am a child of God. That's who I am, right? I am who you say I am, like we sang today. I am a child of God. And then that means I walk as a child of God, right? Delighting in his will, walking in his ways. And that walk is described as humbly. What is that? What does it mean to walk humbly? What does humbly mean?
Putting yourself below.
Does anybody, it's kind of an interesting word. The Latin word is humus. Humus. And it means literally of the earth. What's lower than the earth? The dust. Nothing, really. There's nothing lower than dust. Right? So we get our word human from it, right? And humor, we get that word from it too. But humbly. How do you walk humbly before your God? Yeah.
That parable that Jesus gave of the Pharisee and the publican when they were saying their prayer.
Okay. That's
The
an
Pharisee
image.
is praising himself, what he all does. And the publican just really mournful,
Yeah.
asking for help.
Yep. And
And
so
Jesus said his prayer is more better than
his prayer was accepted. Yeah. So humble. It's a hard word to define, but you know it when you see it, don't you? Yeah. You know it when you see it. To walk humbly before God means you get low. You get low. You put yourself under. And that's what we're going to focus on next Sunday. So I don't want to give too much away. That's our sermon next Sunday. To walk humbly with your God. So we're gonna focus in on this text, but we're gonna focus specifically on this one. What does it mean to walk humbly with your God? Why would it make a difference to say your God or just God? What's the difference between walk humbly with God versus walk humbly with your God? What's the difference? I guarantee you, my catechism kids will be able to tell you like that.
Well, it's a confession of your faith.
This is a relationship.
Yeah.
He's chosen us.
It's a relationship word.
it makes it more person.
It's personal and relational. Exactly. Yep. So the reason they every week they hear the same thing from me, so that's why they'd be able to do it. When Luther does the catechism explanation, the first article, who is Jesus? I believe that Jesus Christ is true God, begotten of the Father from all eternity, and also true man, born of the Virgin Mary, who is my Lord. Yeah, my Lord. He doesn't say the Lord. He could have said he is the Lord. Would that be a true statement? Absolutely. He is the Lord. But how does it change when he says, but that Jesus Christ, true God, true man, is my Lord?
It brings it more personal.
It is a relationship. Personal. Yep. God chooses to be my God and I'm his. It's a relationship. And we're going to focus in on that element then of your God. This is a relational God who says he's going to be our God and we're his people. And that we walk humbly in his paths. Who was one of the most humble movie actors of all time in a character that he played. It was 3 movies in the 80s, and then they just made another version of it about a year ago. No, I'm thinking about the character, not the actual actor.
Okay. Oh.
Da 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 da.
Oh,
Indiana Jones, right? So the third movie of the original was the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. What were they searching for? Do you remember? The Holy Grail, right? And so they get to the cave, and this Templar is the overseer of it. But in order, you got to follow, because his father got shot, right? And so now he's got to go get it. And there was 3 clues. And there's 3 clues. And the one clue, the first clue was that only a penitent man can approach God. Only a penitent man. So he keeps thinking of that. Only a penitent man. And then he finally remembers, what do the penitent men do? They bow and kneel before God, and then the saws come, right? And they don't chop his head off because he remembers to bow right before that's to walk humbly before your God. That's where it starts. To be now, I was an invented character, of course, but guess what? You'll see his picture in the sermon. So, and we'll tell that story a little bit. But that's an image, right? Only the penitent man. That how do you approach God? How do you seek God? There's only one way. You get low. God had his verdict. This is what I require of you. And of course, we'll look at verse 9 real quick. Listen, the Lord is calling out to the city, and to fear your name is wisdom. Heed the rod and the one who appointed it. Am I still to forget, O wicked house, your ill-gotten treasure, the short ephah, which is accursed? Shall I acquit a man with dishonest scales, with the bag of false weights? Because remember, what are they doing? They're cheating out the poor's, right? Her rich men are violent, her people are liars, their tongues speak deceitfully. Therefore, I have begun to destroy you, to ruin you because of your sins. God's got a verdict. Their judgment is coming. He's had the case, their judgment's coming. Final judgment, first judgment, but not the final word. The final word is next week. So you got to come back next week to hear the final word. Again, everybody got questions about this little covenant lawsuit and what's happening? Yeah, which guy?
During judgment, I'm sure there were people that were faithful to God, but they suffered with the wrath.
Yeah, there were faithful people in the midst of this all. Yeah. And they did. They suffered with the rest. They had to go through the judgment, the destruction of the city, and the exiles. Yep, they went through it all. They did. All right, anybody else? Any other thoughts or questions about this text from Micah 6? What's going on?
You know what I found out?
I'm sorry, what?
I used to try to go to bed and I'd pray in bed.
Yeah.
Well, I'd fall asleep. So
I did a
now,
whole Thanksgiving sermon on that once.
Yeah, you get on your knees and before you get in bed.
Oh, see, I'm a little
And
better
pray.
than my thought was in my Thanksgiving sermon. What better way to go to sleep?
Yeah, it is. Well, then pray when you get back to bed. Humble yourself and get on your knees.
Get on your. I got you. You are right. Getting on your knees is humbling yourself. So, did anybody grow up in a church? I know some of you grew up in this church, so you didn't. But my church in Tomahawk, we had kneelers, so that when it came time for the confession of sins, we would kneel. We would put the kneelers down, and we would kneel in the pews, and then we would confess our sins while we were kneeling, which is a That's a posture of humility, isn't it? Yeah.
Our church in Florida has
Yeah,
kneelers.
your church in Florida has that kneel too. Yeah,
Grace
some do,
Lutheran
some
and-
don't. Yeah.
When
Ours
I
did.
was young, we had communion, and when they came back, everybody kneeled.
Yeah, they would just kneel in the.
Oh, in the bed. We were a little bit highfalutin in Talma. We had kneelers. Yeah. So we would, after communion too, that would, the kneelers would go down and then people would kneel and pray.
At the altar, communion.
Yeah, we would have kneeling communion. Yeah. And now because of stairs and it's so
Oh, yeah.
small, it
Yeah.
becomes impractical. So.
Yeah.
What our church in Tomahawk to alleviate that was years ago when they remodeled it, they put the altar rails on the floor level, and you don't have to worry about that. So we still have kneeling communion there. Yeah. But for guests, they didn't know that you knelt after, so they wouldn't. What are you all doing? And yelling.
Yeah.
All right. Anybody else? Thoughts or questions? Cool. Good study.